At the end of the day, food is really one of the cornerstones. And I really think that we should all, to a degree, not everyone can be a farmer and a homesteader for sure, but to take care of at least a portion of your food supply. It's so impactful to be able to grow your own food and to know exactly where it came from.
Michael, how are you? Welcome back to the Meat Mafia podcast.
Thanks for having me again. Much appreciated. It's going really well. It's been a little bit hectic, as I told you when we talked offline, but it's everything is going well according to plan, and I like it.
That's incredible. And for the listeners, this is your second podcast appearance. You were on episode 111, which was in 2022, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
We had read your blog for a while, and then we finally got to meet you at KetoCon and have since built the relationship. And I think you were, at that point, the blog was crushing for you, but I think you were still in a corporate job. And then since that time, you've gone on to do the supplements and the homesteading and the podcast. You have a lot of super exciting things that you're working on.
Yeah, a lot of things have changed since then. It's only been, less than 2 years, I guess. I think it was in summer maybe of 2022 or so. But yeah, a lot of things have changed, progressed, and moved forward, moved in the right direction, I think, and super exciting. I'm excited every morning to get up and make stuff happen and get one step closer to, where we ultimately want to be, or where I want to be, maybe a cowboy and cattleman or a version of that, and so very exciting all.
Absolutely. And part of why I was so excited for this episode is I love when guests proactively come to us with ideas. And so we were texting back and forth, and you said, "Hey, I'd love to come back on the show. And I think we could have a great podcast about, number one, obviously supporting local food sources is incredibly important for your health, supporting the right system, et cetera. But there's also a step beyond that, which is actually procuring and sourcing your own food and kind of getting more into that homesteading lifestyle, which is something we saw pop up tremendously over the last couple of years throughout COVID. But I think where a lot of people get stuck is, okay, I'm living in a city, I'm moving out of the city. How do I actually get started? And I think you're the perfect person to be able to talk about that and give the listeners some inspiration and some really practical advice to get them in their own food growing game.
Yeah, funny enough, whenever I deal with people from the homesteading community, I see all of the great things that they are doing, but beyond the homesteading aspect of the healthy life, there is not much else going on. There are certainly some that do it all, or that play in different areas, but if you talk to the average homesteader about physical fitness and strength, about hormesis, about cold plunging, sauna bathing, biohacking, if you want to open up the umbrella a little bit, there is very little expertise. And then on the flip side, there are all those great biohackers and that promote brands to buy from because they do the right thing, but very few of them actually grow their own food. And I'm like, at the end of the day, food is really one of the cornerstones, and I really think that we should all, to a degree, not everyone can be a farmer and a homesteader for sure, but to take care of at least a portion of your food supply. Because I've realized that even the best farms out there where we can source from, there is, and just to take a very simple example is, pasture chicken. If you want to buy chicken meat, finding farms that raise their chickens in a way that would me want to buy, that chicken meat and consume it, are very few. Even let's say, not to, we don't really have to, mention any names, but all those regenerative farms out there, you still get your Cornish cross chicken, which is basically just an obese baby that you're eating because they get butchered at 8 weeks, right? They are usually fed, even if they are fed corn and soy free, it's still feed that's high in PUFAs. There are very few brands, and in fact, I only discovered one that offer chicken feed that is low in PUFAs, that uses olive oil instead of the typical vegetable oils to bind the minerals to the feed. Just to give you one example, so it's almost impossible to source high quality chicken that is low in polyunsaturated fatty acids, right? It's better with cattle, of course, because cattle are easier to raise, and you just need to feed them grass at the end of the day. But with chickens and monogastric animals, including pigs as well, it's very difficult. And I'm like, I don't want to buy any chicken, from anyone else. I want to do that myself. So at least I know I can get the best chicken possible. And chickens are relatively easy to raise. They're much easier than cattle or sheep or goats or pigs for that matter. It's something you can do if you have a backyard, And that was just one example. Or honey is another good example. Most of the honey, you don't really know what's in there. Other pesticides in there. Most commercial beekeepers treat their bees for mites and for hive beetles and for all kind of things just on a regular basis. It's like scheduled medication. What's going on in the regular beekeeping community? I'm like, I don't want to eat that stuff. The honey might be good, might be well intentioned, but it still has a potential of containing all of that stuff in there that I don't want. And so we are raising our own bees. Another thing that's fairly inexpensive, fairly easy to do, and almost anywhere allowed. Even if your HOA doesn't allow your chicken, at least here in Georgia, there is no law that can prevent you from raising your own bees, regardless of where you are. And I'm like, and that's just the beginning. But in reality, if you look around, there are so many things that where the food you can buy is still less than ideal and relatively easy to do it yourself if you really want to enjoy optimal health. And I think it's particularly true if you already suffer from some sort of metabolic, or chronic disease that you are trying to heal. Taking care of your own food supply as much as you can, I think is a no-brainer and really something. And it's fun.
It's fun, and we're going to get into all that. But
Yeah.
you're already teaching me things, and I'm already having new thoughts in my brain, because one of the things we talk a lot about on the podcast is that no matter what at the grocery store, it's still really hard to verify the sourcing of the meat, where it's coming from, is it grass finished, etc. At least with beef, if the grocery store is fairly good or higher quality, there will be some certifications of grass finished labeling. Some grocery stores will have butchers that can verify the farm and if it's grain finished versus grass finished. But what I always say is that the chicken, there's literally no way to verify. So the best thing that you can do is go to a rancher that you trust and buy chicken. But what you're saying, which I think is such a good point, is that even if it's still corn and soy free, there are high PUFA feeds, so it still might not be optimal for you. Yeah. So instead of just outsourcing all these different aspects of your food, which is so important, I mean, outside of air and water, food is the third most important thing that you can be consuming. Why not take matters into your own hands and actually grow some of this yourself and have the highest quality food product that you possibly can have?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And even within the beef world, I mean, even if we go to the best regeneratively raised farm, be it here domestically in the U.S. or if you think in New Zealand has the better beef, they're all still vaccinated. They get default vaccinations or vaccines, and you can think about it what you want. If you don't care, fine. But there are those out there that say, you know what? I'd rather not have an animal that received any sort of vaccine unless it was medically necessary, to get medication. But the whole proactive, injecting stuff, a lot of people are opposed to that. But try and find, beef here in the US that has not received any vaccine. I would argue it's impossible. And so that's another reason if you want to really take it to the next step and say, you know what, the cleanest possible beef I can possibly get, you'll have to grow it yourself, and you have to raise those cows yourself.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. And so for our listener, I mean, we detailed this a lot the first time you came on the podcast. You're someone that's been extremely passionate and devoted to your health and wellness for a long time. And it sounds like you kind of had this transformation process where whether it was carnivore, animal-based, you experimented with a lot of different modalities, a lot of different forms of nutrition. You really discovered like the perfect macronutrient combination that worked really well for you, worked really well for your family. And then you took it to another level in Georgia and said, look, let's actually get into homesteading and start growing our own food and taking matters into our own hands. So I think for the listener, we would love to just learn a little bit more about what was that light bulb moment of saying, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to grow our own food. And what kind of animals or things did you start with to get going?
Yeah, bees were actually the first ones that we started with. And I think the idea was, at the point, it was a couple of years ago, I don't remember the exact year, but a couple of years ago, maybe 4 years or so ago, we said, you know what, ultimately, if we are not in control of our own food supply, we're always going to be, behind the curveball. We always are reliant and have to trust and, verify, and we'll likely never find, the ideal, food that we want to consume. And I also, at the same time, I was like, I want to do something that puts me in closer contact with nature. I mean, blogging and podcasting and all the stuff in front of the computer is fine, but I need something else. It's not just the digital work. At some point, projecting myself into, the future, maybe 10 years from now, I don't see myself writing blog posts every day, anymore. I want to be, out in nature. I want to, really and more fully embrace more fully do really what I encourage everyone doing already. Like, go for a walk, ground yourself, be in nature, do all of those things. But it's very difficult if you live a modern life where you're, in front of a computer, on the phone, or in an office or whatever. And so now at this point, I kind of have to, or even before we started homesteading, I kind of had to make it a point to go out of my way to embrace those things, right? I had to go out of my way to go into nature. It was not something that I was just doing automatically because my lifestyle is conducive to being in nature. No, I had to get up in front of my computer. I had to go outside, right? And that's really the challenge that a lot of people face. You have to, go to the gym. You have to make the right choice. There are always so many things that you have to do that don't necessarily come naturally because your environment is not set up the way it should. And so we figure that if we just change our environment where, every morning we go to the animals, so we are in nature by default. It's not something we have to think about or remind ourselves. It's just part of, the whole deal. It's part of our lifestyle. And that was one of the key factors. And then obviously, taking control of our food supply was the other one. And so we started with bees because we figured it's super easy the entry barrier is very low. And we started with that, and then we figured, well, now that bees are working well, the next obvious thing is chickens, because they are super easy, and they produce a lot of the food that we eat on a daily basis, meaning eggs. At this point, we weren't really into meat chickens yet. We were just focusing on eggs, and from there, then we've like, okay, on our current property, which is not huge. We just have an acre, and we live in a somewhat, we live in the city at the end of the day. And we said, well, what's the next protein source that we can raise that's easy, that doesn't require, rotational grazing, for which we don't have the acreage for? And rabbits, was the obvious choice because they are quiet, they are easy, they produce a lot of meat, they have a litter every, 45 days, and you get, pounds and pounds of meat. And so we got into rabbits, and then we added geese. And more chickens. And this March actually we're gonna get our first 30 meat birds, the ones that we will eventually then butcher and put in the freezer. And we're gonna get turkeys, so we have our Thanksgiving taken care of. And that's just all small easy steps that I think almost everyone can do, with the goal of, we purchased some property this year, 45 acres, so we have really spaced in to do the management, intensive grazing, and all of the things, to get ready for the bigger animals, for cattle, for sheep, for goats, for pigs, maybe bison, we'll see. But that was the idea of doing it. And instead of saying, let's wait until we have a bigger property, let's wait until, whatever. No, we wanted to do something right away. And bees and chickens, is something we could absolutely do right away, and learn the ropes, figure out what it means to take care of livestock, to take care of disease if need be, to figure all of those things out so you can then scale. And don't, I would not recommend necessarily starting with cattle, if you've never raised any livestock. But if you already know, bees and chickens and geese and, and rabbits, then taking the next step is a much smaller step than going from zero to, rotational grazing and maybe dairy cows. So that was kind of the long-winded answer to your question.
It's an amazing answer, and it honestly is inspiring to me to hear you tell that story. And I even love what you said when you kicked it off, just saying how, look, I want to be outside with my kids and my animals in 10 years. And if I'm still online blogging all the time in 10 years, I would take that as a sign of doing something wrong. And it's funny that you say that, because when I actually think the healthiest period of my life was 2 years ago when I was living in San Diego, before, like when we were first starting the podcast. And the reason why I say that is I was 5 minutes from the beach, so I was going in the ocean all the time.
Yeah.
I lived right on the bay, so I would go outside, take calls, walk 20,000 steps a day. I was in the sun constantly. I was buying all my food from the local farmer. And now it's like I'm probably in better physical shape now, but I actually felt better back then because now I'm way more plugged into my computer, doing podcasts, taking calls, etc. It's all great things. That's what I've signed up for.
Right.
But I personally resonate to what you're saying, and I think that's a good goal of like make money online and then invest it into growing your own food and doing things outside that actually make you feel amazing.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely, and that was also one of the reasons why we said, what, besides the digital content, let's have a physical product, let's do something that can, that sells without me having to produce content every single day. I mean, of course, there is work involved, but it's not necessarily work that I'm the only one capable of doing, whereas with the writing, writing about my experience with a product, only I can do. I mean, I'm the only, writer in the team, so to say. And that is a bottleneck. And by having the homestead, it's still partially about, producing content and on the homesteading side, but it's producing content on the homesteading side means having to be outside, being with the animals, being in the dirt, and I really like that.
100%. And Michael, I would love to know, because I'm sure you were fired up and excited, and I love the mindset that you had of like, even if we don't know everything, why push it off until we have a bigger property? Let's just start with the acre and scale up, and we'll learn as we go. What were some of the most impactful resources just to learn about, meat birds, honey, rabbits, geese, etc.? Like, were there local farmers that you consulted with? Were there courses? How did you kind of learn this stuff early on?
Yeah, I mean, it was really a combination of, YouTube, as always, there's so many homesteaders right now that share their stories and, great stories, great resources. We bought a bunch of books, and kind of figured out, okay, what is, similar to, I guess, the traditional health space, there is academia, there is the opinion out there, how it works based on science, how you should, raise your cattle and feed, conversion ratios and all of those things. And then there are those who actually, live it and do it more based on, the cycles of nature, I mean, White Oak Pastures was a great inspiration to kind of, show how they are doing things differently, but in a much smarter way, in my opinion. And then from there, obviously, they were one of the first ones, doing, regenerative farming, etc. But now there are so many different outlets who do it on different scales with different variations. And you read more books and you try stuff out and you see what works and what doesn't. But in a lot of cases, it's you get like an idea, you get a framework from something you see, be it a video or something you read in a book. But then you try it out yourself and you figure out, well, in my particular environment, where I am, with the resources that I have, with the expertise that I have, I gotta do things differently, And so you try things out, and sometimes, it doesn't work. Sometimes it works, and you learn from that, and, it's very much like anything else. You've got to get your feet wet, make mistakes. I like to make quick mistakes, improve, and move on. And that's been really the foundation of our, of our growth, I want to say.
It's amazing to think that we live in a world where you can learn the basics of ranching off YouTube and just kind of get out there and right and get some practical experience, and you figure it out and you learn over time. But I think it's that learner self-starter mentality that seems like it's been really impactful to you. I wanted to ask you if you remember the feeling of eating chicken from one of your meat birds for the first time. And the reason why I say that is I often, when it comes to chicken, I think about the intro to the book, The Dorito Effect. I don't know if have you read it before?
No.
It's a great book, and it's all about just how our taste buds have effectively been manipulated by these processed food companies, and it tells the story about the chicken of tomorrow. And the first passage of the book is there's a guy who's married to a woman, and she's trying to make chicken similar to how this guy's grandmother used to make it, how he remembered it. And she would always test out, try new recipes, etc. She could never get it. She finally found a local chicken producer that made like evolutionarily consistent chicken, exactly how you were talking about. And so she makes it for him for the first time. He cuts into the chicken, he bites it, and he literally starts tearing up because it brought back all those memories from the type of birds that his grandmother was making for him too. So I'm just curious, for someone that's never tried chicken the way that you're talking about it, how different is the taste and how good was it the first time you got to experience it?
Well, as far as the meat bird is concerned, I don't know yet because our first meat birds are going to come in March, and so
Mm.
they have not been raised and butchered yet. So I don't know about the meat, the chicken meat yet. But I can tell you with eggs and with rabbits, um, it didn't really bring back any memories because I never had rabbit meat in the past, and we had already high quality chicken eggs. But what I can tell you is that the the feeling of, I guess it was more like being grateful and realizing that what you have on your plate or what I had on my plate is something that I raised. There was no middleman involved. I didn't have to go anywhere. Everything that's in that egg is because of our doing. Or anything that's everything that was in that rabbit meat. And actually, the other day I had a rabbit stew for breakfast with eggs, and I had some honey with it. And I
Mm.
realized by looking at the plate, everything on that plate came from our backyard. And that feeling that it gives you is, it's hard to describe, but it's you feel like deeply grateful that you took care of that entire plate. And right now, of course, we only do it, in a very limited manner. I mean, we have our rabbits, we have the honey, we have the eggs, but just extrapolating that to a point where at some point we'll have beef, the pork, the salami that I eat, I cured myself, all of the things that we are ultimately going to do in the not so far future. That feeling also, visualizing what we're gonna do is incredibly impactful, and it, for me at least, it has changed the way I see life and what's important to me. I know this sounds all very like all the way up there, but it's really it's so impactful to be able to grow your own food and to know exactly where it came from, and all of the, and ultimately not only giving your animals a good life, but also taking it at the end of the day, which not in case of the eggs, but at least the rabbits, that is also something incredibly impactful and powerful, and makes you appreciate the food so much more because it was who took that animal's life in the best way possible, but nevertheless, that's what happened.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly, where it's a level of appreciation for your food where someone like me or a listener that's never harvested their own food before can't possibly relate to, unless we actually get our hands in the dirt, like you said, and experience it for ourselves. And that actually kind of led me into the question that you just touched on, is how would you say your perspective on just morality and animals in general has changed just doing a lot of the homesteading and protecting these animals, and then also having to take their life too to provide sustenance to your family?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't really changed the way I see it from a moral perspective. I'm still 1000% convinced that it is necessary, and it's just for us to do that. I mean, if we don't eat animals, we're not gonna thrive. That's just the way everything has been set up by whoever or whatever, depending on what your belief system is. But nevertheless, one thing I've realized is what many people don't seem to be getting their head around is that you can actually love an animal and then take its life. Right? In case of, very good example, we had a rooster until a couple of months ago that I absolutely adored. He was like my buddy for the longest time, and we actually, put out a a YouTube short that was kind of, it went viral, but for all the reasons, we didn't intend to. And I loved that rooster, but at some point, he was so aggressive to anyone or to everyone that we couldn't do our chores anymore. The kids couldn't help, the wife couldn't help. At the end of, I got scratched when I went down because for the longest time I was the only one who could collect eggs because he wouldn't attack me. And at some point, then he attacked me as well, and there was nobody left that could, do the chores without being, scratched up all the time. And so we decided we have to end the rooster's life. We have to butcher him. And we did that, and at that point I realized that as much as you care for animals, I mean, I don't know how often I ran out there if there was a hawk coming in, defending our chickens, that later on ended up in the pot. I was fighting for their life up until the point where I took it. you know. And I came to realize that it's perfectly normal, and it's, I think, how it's supposed to be, that you care and you care for and you love an animal, especially if it's livestock, and then at some point, you know, you harvest the animal to nourish yourself. And that's something I think many people don't understand. How can you love an animal and then kill it? But once you're in that position, you realize this is how it's supposed to be. You know, it just feels okay and just.
It's really well said. Yeah, it seems like almost like a juxtaposition to the average person, and then when you dig deeper to what you're saying, it's like it's kind of this beautiful experience of being able to love something so much, take care of it, recognizing that this animal is like the evolutionary food that you're meant to be consuming, and then you're taking in those nutrients like you said, and then you have the energy to go live the best possible life that you can, and then ultimately do right by that animal. And then that animal is also creating all this other life out on your property too, and it's kind of this amazing cyclical experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's exactly what it is.
Michael, what has it been like as a dad to get your kids exposure to this homestead life? Because I'd have to imagine that's such a special experience for you and your wife.
It's like it's a dream come true. I've always imagined, you know, like doing stuff with the kids differently to really get them back to the roots, you know, and for a long time before we started homesteading, you know, it is kind of a, you know, how do you do that? What does it really mean, you know? And now we've discovered that, well, what it really means is to do things entirely differently and to be more in line with, you know, what's been happening in nature, you know, be it, you know, part of a tribe, you know, living with animals, taking care of animals, taking an animal's life, harvesting animals, you know, consuming the foods we're supposed to consume instead of the processed junk you get in the store, and homeschooling them, you know, taking them out of the system, you know, and doing things the way we think is best. Might not always be the best way, you know, we make plenty of mistakes, but at least feeling like you're in control of directing their future. Or I shouldn't really say that, because we are not really in the business of directing their future and pointing them in a certain way, but giving them a lot of different opportunities, giving them a framework that we think is best, and just observing, you know, the decisions and choices they make, you know, and seeing that by default, if they are not influenced in a certain way, they actually make very good decisions, you know, and they do very good things, and they listen to their body, you know, they make the right food choices, even if they are, you know, less than ideal choices to them available. And it's just it's a great feeling to, you know, to have that opportunity with them. Not that, I kind of wish that I had that opportunity as well, but my parents, you know, didn't have the, the means to do any of that. And I'm super grateful that we do have the means, and that we can show them a different way. And, you know, hopefully, you know, they'll take that opportunity and make the best out of it. If not, then that's fine too, you know, but at least they have the opportunity.
Yeah, that's the amazing part about your story is, like, obviously, and I feel similar to you, is I wish my parents had the skill set so they could have passed it on. But the beautiful thing is that you completely learned this by yourself with your wife from people that you trust, and now you get to pass that on to your kids. And from an extremely young age, they have the most intimate relationship with food and an understanding of what real food actually is. I think a lot about my Northeast upbringing in New Jersey, and I just felt like in the 90s, purely anecdotal, but I felt like all my neighbors had gardens where they were growing fruits and vegetables and things like that. And then when I look into the 2000s into now, seems like almost no one has, they're not harvesting their own food. And there's also like a de-wiring of understanding what's a food-like substance versus what is an actual food, where your kids from day one of being out there, they have that proper relationship with food. So it's so cool to think about as they grow up, like this level of knowledge that's going to be built inside of them for decades. It's really special.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's definitely something we are, you know, reinforcing and really making sure they, you know, get uncomfortable. They get exposed to everything, you know. At least, you know, we want to show them, you know, all kinds of different things, but help them understand, okay, what is something that we would consider, you know, normal and consistent with how humans have been doing things for a long time. Versus what is, you know, what is newer and maybe not so conducive to optimal health.
Definitely. Michael, do you grow fruits and vegetables as well on the property?
Yes, we do. I mean, we have berries that've been growing fairly successfully. Raspberries in particular, but also strawberries and some blueberries and elderberries. Even though I mean, they are berries, but not in the same, I guess, category as raspberries. We use them more like for making tea and stuff. We also grow a couple of veggies. Um, but I want to say significantly less successful than our protein game, and that's I think also because we care more for the protein, we focus more on it, we spend more, we are more on top of our animals than our veggie garden, but going forward, we want to take it also more seriously and even grow some of the things that I would, not necessarily recommend you consume in greater amounts. But, for example, ketchup. The kids still eat ketchup, and we buy it, from Primal Kitchen, which is, at least one of the better ones, I think. But ultimately, I want to grow my own tomatoes, and at least know exactly, what goes into that ketchup, or, grow maybe, some other things that I don't care for much, but like the smell of onion. I mean, if you roast onions in butter, I mean, is there a better smell than that? Are
No,
onions something that I would recommend you eat a whole lot? No, I can't handle a lot either, but just having it from time to time, or at least having the smell, in the kitchen is
definitely.
beautiful. And so, we want to grow a bunch of those things and see what we can preserve and can and, and ferment and what have you, and make maybe more compatible than it would be just eaten raw. And yes, so it is something we do, and it is something we want to do more so going forward.
Yeah, even being able to grow some nice parsley and make some homemade chimichurri for a steak
Yeah.
or
Oh
something like
yeah.
that. I think I fall into a similar camp with you where I'm really not consuming vegetables much at all, but like, being able to flavor your dishes with some, sauteed garlic or some
Yeah.
chimichurri or some parsley and onions, like that's an amazing part of the experience, but more as like a flavor enhancement versus like, hey, I'm going to make a separate vegetable side dish. Like I
Right.
very rarely do that at this point.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. And I think also, once you have reached a certain level of health and you're somewhat in tune, you can figure out how much of what you can get away with, what does impact you, what doesn't impact you. And so we've gotten significantly, I don't want to necessarily say relaxed, but more like in tune and opportunistic in terms of what we eat and how we eat. Like every so often, my wife bakes double fermented sourdough bread, and if we have that for a weekend, everyone is fine. Nobody's falling apart. We wouldn't eat that every day, but every so often, it's something special. Not in the sense that the food is special because it's so super nutritious, but it's special in the sense of it brings back memories. Maybe from especially how I grew up. I'm from Austria. Bread is a staple. Same in my wife. With rice, for example. So we soak white rice overnight, and then we have it every so often. Everyone is happy with that. Nobody's falling apart, and I think also figuring out how you can process certain foods is almost as important as learning what foods you can and cannot eat or should not eat. And that really goes, to the mentality of, I think, Dr. Bill Schindler, who says, you have to learn how to eat like a human, meaning, food processing methods, fermenting, soaking, sprouting, peeling, grinding, heating, what have you. All the things that are out there. Humans have figured out over decades or over, tens of thousands of years probably, how you can process certain foods to make them less toxic, plant foods in particular, less toxic, extract more nutrients from those foods, and make them maybe a little bit more compatible. That doesn't turn them into ideal foods or staple foods for that matter, but it at least is something that I think you can enjoy on occasion. And maybe then, when you have, family over who doesn't necessarily share your, strict carnivorous or animal-based, eating styles, you can make it work for everyone. And every so often, we do that amongst ourselves, and everything is good, and nobody's falling apart, nobody's getting, cancer or diabetes,
Yeah.
as long as you understand, how that food responds to you, or how your body responds to that food, and you have to, modulate that accordingly.
Very, very well said. And you're someone that's done a lot of different experimentation with different diets over the years. And I feel like you've really honed in on the specific food groups and types of foods that make you feel your best. So I'm just curious, like as of today, what foods are you gravitating towards? What are you staying away from? And also just like, what does a typical day of eating look like for you at this point?
Yeah, I mean, very much animal based. I mean, we eat a boatload of beef and eggs. We also do a moderate amount of pork. If we find good sources, we do occasionally chicken, and we're gonna do probably more chickens once we raise our own coming March. We'll probably increase that intake. I do a lot of fermented raw dairy, so I ferment my own kefir. We get the raw milk from a local farm here, and I ferment that overnight, and I have that a lot. I mean, I drink kefir every single day, and I do fairly well with, really well with it, really. I do eat a lot of raw cheeses as well. So dairy, meat, beef in particular, and eggs is really a staple. And then from a carbohydrate perspective, I mean, I'm fairly active. I don't work out 6 times a week anymore like I used to, but I'm still, burning, I want to say up to 3,000 calories a day, just, lifting feedbacks and shoveling dirt and, doing all the things that are necessary. And so I eat probably up to 100 grams of carbs a day. From raw honey, from the dairy, from, occasionally, white rice, occasionally the sourdough, fruits. Those are typically my sources of carbs. And that really applies across the board for the kids as well. We all eat more or less the same. Maybe our, macronutrient split might differ from meal to meal, but the core ingredients are the ones that, we all pretty much eat the same. And I eat typically twice a day. So I eat, I actually don't have a fixed eating time anymore. I used to be fairly strict in terms of I'm going to fast for X number of hours and then I eat. Now I'm trying to mix it up. Usually I work out in the morning when I work out at 8:30, and so then I eat by 10 is my first meal. If I don't work out, I might have my first glass of kefir maybe at 8:30, maybe at 9. So I try to mix it up. But it's usually a breakfast type of meal, and then a fairly large one, and then a fairly large dinner, ideally around 5, sometimes earlier, sometimes a little later, but roughly around that time. And that's how we all eat 2 meals a day, fairly big ones, obviously, because and I eat about 4,000 calories a day. That's the other thing. I do overconsume calories. But because it's mostly protein and fat, both of 2 macronutrients that are used for significantly more than just energy, I can get away with eating that much without gaining weight, or at least no body fat. I gain hopefully a little bit of lean muscle tissue, but that's pretty much it. So that's how my eating looks like.
Got it. So very simple, lot of animal products, some cheeses, raw kefir, some rice from time to time, some raw honey, maybe a little bit of fruit too. And I like what you'd said about eating some type of a breakfast type meal, because I've actually been finding myself in a similar camp than you, where I do 2 big meals, one at lunch, one at dinner. And I've been noticing after a workout at the gym, I've been really enjoying like a protein shake with raw milk, 3 or 4 egg yolks, and then like 2 scoops of the Noble chocolate. And I actually feel better doing that than doing a really prolonged fast and not consuming anything in the morning.
Yeah, no, true. I mean, with the fasting, I've come to the conclusion that it is a stressor, a good one, a hormetic stressor, but it's a stressor nevertheless. And depending on what the other stressors in your life look like on a given day, fasting might not always be to your advantage. Especially on days then when you work out and then you do the sauna and the cold plunge and you're stressed at work, adding on the fasting, I don't know is necessarily a good thing. So I tried, and also getting into a routine. I mean, you can get used to any routine, and it feels normal. So if I do 16 hours of fasting every day and I do it every day, I get used to it. I don't need I feel like I don't need food any earlier. But then again, I think it loses also the effectiveness of pushing you outside of your comfort zone, because you just got used to it. It's like if you cold plunge every day and it's nothing anymore, it's probably less beneficial. So I try to mix things up and really be, not unpredictable, because there's obviously a level of predictability in my life. But, sometimes I eat early, sometimes I eat late. The other day, for the very first time in forever, I had 2 pairs before I work out. I usually always work out faster, but I'm like, you know what? If I really want to be as consistent as possible with, our ancestors, they didn't eat at the same time every day. They didn't work out at the same time every day. It was opportunistic. And so I try to mimic that as good as I can without really being random, but being predictably unpredictable, I guess. That makes
I
sense.
love that. And it's like you've put in so many reps that when you've put in those reps over years, your body just develops this incredible intuition where clearly it was signaling to you that you wanted those two pairs before a workout. So instead of saying,
Right.
I need to stay in this very rigid fasting state, you're like, no, I'm going to give my body what it wants. And I'm sure you had an
Yeah.
amazing workout.
Yeah. Actually, I did.
And I like your perspective on carbs too. And you're still fairly like moderate to low carb if you're only consuming 100 grams of carbs a day. And I sympathize with that because when I'm just looking purely at my GI and some of the autoimmune issues that I have, plus just general body composition, when I'm as close to like red meat, eggs, animal products, and water as possible, that's when I feel the best. And if I'm doing some really slow, long distance endurance training, I can do really well with a low carb diet. But when I'm ramping up those workouts and they're higher intensity or I'm sprinting or whatever, I just don't have that same pop when I don't have carbohydrates in my diet. So I appreciated what you said about that.
Yeah, I mean, I typically, my CrossFit workouts are typically shorter. So maybe, the longest Metcon, the metabolic conditioning aspect, typically we have a strength, and then we have a metabolic conditioning. And so the Metcon part is usually not longer than 20 minutes. So I can use my glycogen stores. I don't run out of glycogen because of that one workout. But I can tell them, I come home, I have my, keto-friendly, carnivorous, breakfast, meaning meat and eggs, and maybe some bacon. And then in the afternoon, I feel like, I'm running low on fuel. Because I'm at this point, I'm literally running low on glucose because, gluconeogenesis, takes some time to replenish, those glucose stores, and the brain and some other, tissue requires glucose that your body can make, but it's much more efficient to provide it via food. That's probably one of the reasons why we can metabolize, carbohydrates into glucose. There's going to be a reason for that, and so I feel that if I withhold carbs at that point, there is no benefit but just suffering. And by suffering, I don't mean I'm not falling apart, but I perform less than optimally, which might still be higher than most other people, but less than what my baseline is. And so on the flip side, however, if I overdo it on carbs, because there are certain days where I'm like, let's say once every, 2 months we have pizza, and we make our own sourdough pizza, it's all handmade and, the best ingredients that we possibly can put together, but nevertheless it's pizza, it's a high carb type of thing. If you put 2 pies in front of me, you can be sure I'm going to eat those 2 pies, and that might be 500, carbs, net grams of carbs, And if I were to do this, then that would certainly be less than conducive to my health. I feel like my energy, is going to be wonky, and all kinds of stuff are going to happen that I don't feel necessarily good about. So I know that there is an upper limit for me. And I know that there is a lower limit for me, but it seems like the 80 to 100 and 50 maybe grams of carbs a day is somewhat the sweet spot where I maintain stable energy levels and I don't suffer any from the I'm running out of glycogen kind of thing, especially on days where I work out.
Michael, to your point, do you have any recommendations for someone that might be a little bit newer in the space and doesn't really know how to establish their baseline? And one of the reasons why I'm asking that is we both have the perspective, and I would imagine some listeners that are listening have this perspective of understanding what it feels like to maybe not have optimal metabolic health and then gaining that metabolic health. And you have such a great understanding of what makes my body feel good versus what foods don't sit well with my body. For someone that's newer in the space, they just don't have that comparison. So I think it's difficult for some people to really understand that baseline. For me, a food journal was super impactful, just writing everything that I was eating, but then also keeping inventory of like my energy levels, my bowel movements when I had ulcerative colitis. And I'm curious if there's anything that you found to be effective to getting that really good baseline that people are looking for.
I think doing strict carnivore for 30 to 90 days is an incredible way because that really removes all the potential factors. I mean, I've yet to meet anyone who says, "Oh, I'm sensitive to meat," and even if you argue, well, there are those who don't handle, beef very well. Well, get bison, get some sort of ruminant and eat only that with water and maybe electrolytes and do this for 30 to 90 days. And you will feel freaking amazing. Regardless of what your pre-existing condition is, you will notice a significant improvement. And then, you add stuff back, one by one. and you'll notice, oh, suddenly, I'm bloated again. I get gassy. I get, diarrhea. I have heartburn. I have, my skin breaks out. Whatever the case might be, you'll figure out really quick, what does not sit well with you. And in some cases, it might be a combination of two things. Maybe eating bananas all by themselves is fine, and maybe doing, whatever else is fine. Putting both together, or doing it maybe for more than one day. If you eat, let's say if I have bread 3 days in a row, my skin starts breaking out. If I have it 2 days in a row, nothing is going to happen, So you kind of need to play with this a little bit, but I think the best way to establish a baseline is just to eat meat. That's the most, I think, compatible food for humans, and it'll clear you out. It'll fix any gut issues you might have. It'll fix any other kind of inflammatory conditions, and you'll get a really good baseline. My wife, even though we are an animal-based diet, so we are by no means on a standard American diet where we suffer from inflammation and chronic disease and all of that. But even she told me before we went to Costa Rica, she did carnivore for 3 weeks, and she said the difference between eating only meat and eating some of the other things that we do is night and day. And that was from a already relatively good baseline. Imagine if you're on a standard American diet, if you've never paid attention to what you're eating, and you go on a carnivore diet. Yes, you might have the keto flu in the beginning and blah, blah, but within the first 30 days, you'll feel a dramatic difference, and that is your new baseline. That's my take on it.
It's such a powerful message, and it's something that I personally resonate with too, of like just understanding, having a super inflamed gut and your life being revolved around having to go to the bathroom, and it's embarrassing, and you always feel inflamed, you always feel fatigued, you don't feel like a normal person. And then you actually put the right foods into your system, these animal products like you're talking about, and you just stick to it. And you lo and behold, it also doesn't take that long as well. Within a week, I felt like a different person. All it took was like 5 to 7 days. And I'm like, I absolutely feel transformed. And I just kind of went deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think a lot of other people are experiencing that too, which is why I think that's one of the benefits of social media, is that it allows people to share their anecdotal stories, so other people that are struggling can get proof of concept of like, all right, well, if this person healed from Hashimoto's by going carnivore, why can't I do the same for myself too?
Right. And your audience is probably different to, the general audience that you would find on YouTube or anywhere else. So anyone listening to the, Meat Mafia podcast probably understands that eating meat is not a bad thing. But regardless, when people say, well, but this is crazy, eating only meat, you need a balanced diet, you need fiber, you need X, Y, Z, I always say, look, it's very easy to figure out. Eat only Oreos for 60 to 90 or 30 to 90 days. Eat only potatoes. Eat only plants. Do whatever you want. Do it for a while and see how you feel, and then do something else and compare. I would recommend starting with meat, because you're going to get to the end result, fairly quickly, instead of having to waste your time, with all kinds of different foods. But at the end of the day, it's a free experiment. It doesn't cost you much to, eat something for a while and see how you do, and then eat something else for a while and see how you do, and figure it out. And I think everyone who gets their head around that meat isn't actually bad, it's not going to clog your arteries, you don't need fiber, to poop and all of those things. They have every single one who's done it, it has worked, and they feel dramatically better than they did before. And it's the proof is in the pudding at the end of the day. It's very easy to figure out.
It really is. For you, Michael, I'm curious, do you ever get cravings to go off your diet or eat processed food, or are you one of those people that you fixate on how good this food makes you feel versus how bad this processed food makes you feel, and you kind of stick to that as your mental model? I'm just curious, because I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, even if they're in this carnivore space. They do well, and then they kind of get pulled out of it, and then they kind of fall off the track, and it's like this constant cycle of doing really well and then putting weight back on, and they can't really maintain that consistency over time.
I've seen a lot of people. It's not that I'm without cravings, I don't crave McDonald's, or I don't crave broccoli. There are certain things that, and I'm not saying this is all because I'm so mentally strong or whatever. I think there is a mental aspect to this. I think there is certainly a feedback loop in the brain where, we get addicted to certain things, and the brain, if you think you can be stronger than, some of those hormones in your body that tell you to eat, to go after salty food or sweets or whatever, you're mistaken. Your body, your hormones always win, because I think that goes back to our ancestral core of our, basic survival, that if the brain thinks we need to eat certain things, you're gonna eat certain things, and I think it's really a matter of rewiring some of those neural connections so that you crave then different things. I crave, for example, as funny as it sounds, a steak or a homemade meat patty, burger patty, with a lot of salt. That's for me, if I can easily overeat on, if we make 5 pounds of, burger patties, with butter and with salt, you can be sure I'm gonna overeat to a point where I feel almost sick because I can't stop.
Yes.
Not the worst food to overeat on, but nevertheless, I can tell my body's like, I want to have more of that. I'm the same way with pizza. Now, I'm not in the sense of that if there is no pizza around, I'm like, oh, I need to order pizza. No, but if it's in front of me, if I purchased it, you can be sure that I'm going to eat it. I'm not going to leave a slice behind, And so, yes, I do have those things too, but I don't have that anymore for, just plain out junk food, that where I'm like, okay, I need to go to the store and buy a bag of chips.
Definitely.
And I think for me, the change that flipped in my head once I saw those foods as poison. I don't see that as food anymore. I feel like this goes against my very core. And I don't know what happened for me to make that mental switch. I can't tell you that, oh, this is what you need to do to get to fix those cravings. But it's ultimately, I think, all a combination of neural connections that you need to rewire. If you keep reinforcing certain things, those neural connections are going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, and it's very difficult to break them apart. So you need to work on rewiring your brain, but also at the same time rewiring maybe your gut in terms of letting certain bacteria starve out that are causing some of those cravings. And for me, fasting, if you've never really fasted for extended periods, try to not eat for 3 days, and I can tell you, whatever food someone puts in front of you, and if it's raw liver and you've never eaten or liked liver, you're gonna dig in, and it's gonna be the best food you've ever had. Because it resets your perception of what it means to be hungry, what it means to be, craving, driven by hunger, versus you're not really hungry, but you're just craving for something because maybe you're anxious, or maybe something else is going on. So I think the combination of fasting, stress management, changing your environment, not having access to if you have those foods in your pantry, the chances that you're going to give into your cravings are much higher than if you don't have that food at home, And so I think it's a combination of those things that can help you get off that bandwagon. And unfortunately, I've never been on it. In a way that I have to go to McDonald's now because I can't stand not having a burger from them.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very well said. And I always come back to the protein test. I forget who I learned this from, but very simple. If you're craving a piece of steak, chicken, eggs, fish, an animal product, you're actually hungry. If you're not craving those things, you're just eating for pleasure, enjoyment, oral fixation, whatever it is. And I think that's tried and true. And also to your point, Michael, I think this stuff is a matter of systems. Like if I look at myself, if I'm doing my job of like going to the local farmer's market or Whole Foods, wherever, and I'm stocking my fridge up for the week with good quality steak, chicken, eggs, etc., milk, I'll stay really on point with my diet. If I'm in the office and I have an air fryer here and I can bring meat in and I can cook my own meals, I'm great. Where I would get into trouble is if I don't set myself up for success and I'm like, oh, it's 8 o'clock at night. I don't have time to go to the grocery store. I don't have anything in the fridge. Oh, let me just stop for this. Let me pick something up from a restaurant.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. Environment, I think, is crucial for success. Having the right foods at home, not having the foods at home that you don't want to eat. And that's even more true than if you have kids, because, if you say, hey, kids, you can't have that because it's not good for you. I'm like, so why do we have it at home? If it's not good for you? Why can you have it but not me? And the other thing, the other nuance so that is, related to cravings, I notice that when I'm stressed, I'm gravitating towards, quick bursts of energy. And very often, depending on what types of foods you have at home, those might be processed carbs, be it in chips or be it, whatever the case might be. And so I think it's really managing your anxiety, managing your stress levels goes a long way of dealing with those cravings. And then one of the snacks that I find to be super helpful is boiled eggs. And then you just have like a little like jar of salt, and I just like dunk them into salt a little bit, so it's a super salty kind of snack, but at the end of the day, it's protein, fat, and it's salt, none of which is bad, but it takes care of that craving aspect in a very, I think, healthy and elegant way. And like I've noticed that today I was super stressed. I'm like, I need something. And I'm like, okay, you don't need anything. Your brain just wants something because it thinks like we have to defend our life, and that's why we need energy. But there is nothing life-threatening around me other than, regular work. And so I went to the fridge. I got 3 of those boiled eggs, and I just, had them with salt, and it took care of business. The salt, I guess the salty aspect that took care of my cravings, and the protein took care of satiety and making sure that I feel like fueled, and that was it. Much better than going and getting a bag of plantain chips or sweet potato chips or whatever you might have at home, where there's zero nutrients in there. It's just carbs, processed carbs for that matter. Boiled eggs I think are one of the best snacks and craving killers out there.
Yeah, it really touched all the bases because you're getting a nice whack of protein, you're getting some fat in there, and then there is something about that saltiness that just kills your appetite when you eat something really salty. I've had a lot of success with that too. I meant to tell you, have you seen this cowboy butter recipe that's gone viral on, I think, like TikTok and Instagram recently? Because I tried it last night.
No,
Dude,
what
it
is
was,
that?
oh my gosh, it was literally, I think, the best steak that I've ever had in my entire life. So you basically take a big stick of grass-fed butter, you slowly cook it down. You have like a clove of minced garlic, some chopped up chives, a little bit of Dijon mustard, chili flakes, salt, pepper, and then you throw it all in there, zest some lemon, and just kind of let it simmer
Uh-huh.
and just dip your steak into it. I'll send you the recipe. It was so good that I wasn't even that hungry. Like I probably was going to eat half of the steak, but I ate the
Yeah.
entire steak because it
Yeah.
tasted that good.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. I mean, it sounds delicious, and those are the things that if someone says, but eating meat every day is boring. No, you can actually make that very exciting, and I bet if you have that type of steak, you can at least eat that for 2 weeks in a row without feeling bored, and then you switch it up and make. Kathy makes those meatballs. She puts in a little bit of like yeast, nutritional yeast, and maybe some coconut flour or whatever, and salt, and whatever other spice, and they just taste absolutely delicious. And there is no way to get used to that very quickly. I mean, you can alternate between those meatballs and the steak, and then maybe with a good omelet that's in a lot of butter, and maybe with some cheese on top, and you get really a satisfying meal day in and day out without eating anything that you're not supposed to.
A cool thing to try with those meatballs, if you took some of the NK supplements, some of the capsules,
Uh-huh.
and just took out the organs powder and sprinkled it into the
Yeah,
meatballs,
yeah,
and it's just for meatballs, and you can't even
yeah,
taste the organs at
yeah,
all.
yeah. That's very true. That's actually what a lot of our customers with kids do, because the kids, if they can't swallow, don't want to swallow a capsule, just open it, put them on top of whatever. You barely taste it, and you get your organ fix.
Well, you got me excited when you were talking about the possibility of incorporating some bison onto the property in the future, because I think there's so much value in someone creating like a bison liver supplement or a bison organ supplement. So I'm wondering if that could be in the future for you if you're going to be raising some of your own bison.
Yeah, I mean, probably not for our supplements business, because I don't think I'm going to have enough bison liver to do that. But I'm actually in touch with a ranch, with a freeze dryer, with a domestic freeze dryer, believe it or not. And they wanna offer bison, and so I'm actually considering adding that to the product line as like an alternative for anyone who doesn't like or cannot handle beef, and appreciates bison. I mean, I really like the taste of bison liver raw. That is, it tastes so pleasant and mild in comparison to beef, and it's obviously much closer to how humans would have eaten than cattle, which are really a human invention to a degree.
Well, if you did that, you would have at least one super happy customer because I would buy that all day long. And there's very few foods where when you consume it, you feel almost like this instant pulse of vitality. And I feel like liver in general is one of them, but bison liver in
Yeah,
particular. I remember going to Rome Ranch in Fredericksburg for the first time, and they butchered a bison. They shot the bison, they butchered the bison right on the property, and then they chopped up a bunch of the bison liver, and then they had some Maldon salt, and you could just sprinkle it right on top of
yeah,
the liver. And number one, to your point, it has this amazing, pleasant taste to it. It doesn't
yes,
taste metallic at all, like certain
yeah,
types of cow liver. And I felt this like unbelievable burst of energy afterwards
yeah,
that I haven't felt from many other foods that I've consumed before.
yeah, absolutely, yep,
Are
yep.
you are you big in incorporating raw foods in your diet? Do you throw in some raw stuff too?
I do. Yes, I do. I mean, most of the meat that we eat is more raw than anything else. But also, organs, liver in particular, we do eat. I eat raw. The kids not so much. The wife not so much either. They stick to the MK supplements.
Yeah.
But I do whenever I get a chance. I eat some raw. It doesn't happen every day or every week for that matter. But if I get it from somewhere, be it from hunting deer or from buying it fresh at the farmers market or anything else, or even from our own rabbits. I don't mind eating it raw.
Awesome.
And yeah, and one of the thing, if you're into organs but you don't like the taste and you don't care for buying supplements, just chop it up, freeze it in small cubes, and then just take the cube and swallow it out of the freezer, swallow it. You don't even taste it, and you still get your piece of organ meat, assuming you trust the source.
Yeah, there's so many little tricks to make organs more palatable, but we love your products too, and we see you putting more SKUs and products out there, and it's exciting to see. And the company didn't even exist when we first got to meet you, just like Noble didn't even exist either. So
Yeah.
it just shows when you find something that you're passionate about, not trying to be absolutely perfect with it, but just
Right.
start and you'll
Yeah.
improve and iterate over time.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Michael, what's the best way for people to connect with you if they want to learn a little bit more about what you got going on, and whether it's homesteading, health content, your podcast, MK supplements, there's so many great things that you're doing. So
Yeah, I mean there are now a lot of different outlets and channels depending on what your consumption preference is. But the podcast, Primal Shift Podcast, primalshiftpodcast.com, is certainly one way where I try to share something that's a little bit less in depth than my blog posts. Not everyone appreciates reading 5,000 words on a given subject, even though I try to write it in a way so it's very easy to consume and has all of the information that you need to make educated decisions. But the podcast elevates it a little bit. It has more like practical day-to-day kind of stuff, what I do, how I do it. The YouTube channel, same thing. It's I always try to have a companion video to most of my blog posts so you can consume it there as well. And on Instagram, we actually started now blogging on our homesteading page as well, kummerhomestead.com. So we're going to put out some of the stuff that we've learned, and how to get started with homesteading, some of the lessons learned from raising chickens and bees and all of those things. So that's something. And the same with on YouTube. We have the Kummer Homestead YouTube channel. So depending on what you're interested in, if more health, fitness, biohacking, it's michaelkummer.com and Primal Shift Podcast and my corresponding YouTube channel and Instagram as well. That's one of the social media outlets that we are fairly active on. And then Kummer Homestead, anything homesteading related. Some of it obviously bleeds over. I try to cross-link whenever it makes sense. But we try to keep it as separate as possible depending on what it is that you wanna learn more on.
that's great. And I love how you have all different forms of media and content that are out there, because there is this amazing surge of seemingly younger people and younger families that are interested in getting into the homesteading game. So whether they want to read a long form blog article, see a YouTube video, listen to a podcast, etc., it seems like you're touching on all the bases there and just trying to put out such amazing information. And you're someone that Harry and I have learned a lot from. We always love getting to chat with you. We always feel like we learned something new. So really appreciate you coming on the podcast and doing this with me, man.
Oh, no, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it too, for the second time now.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll do a part 3 in Georgia, right? Maybe down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe on our new farm then, huh? We do an on-site.
I would love that. That would be amazing. That would be amazing. Well, appreciate it, Michael. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Cheers.
Take care.